Hello. Today's video is for any of you who may be literally just starting with your very first oil paints. And you might be wondering what you need as a bare minimum to get started. So today I'm just going to show you the absolute bare essentials of what you need to get started and how to set up your space in the simplest way possible so you can paint efficiently and with minimal mess. So let's get started. So the first thing you will need is a canvas. So this here is just a small canvas board. Canvas boards tend to be the cheapest starting place for buying surfaces to paint on. So this one is quite cheap. It's just a small 6x8 inch canvas. You'll need a brush. So if you're going to get one brush, I recommend get sort of a medium-sized brush, and my favorite brushes are flat brushes. So this one is flat, as you can see, and I really like it because you can use it for lots of different brush marks. Broad brush marks like this, flat ones, tiny little dashes, and you can also use the corner here for little tiny bits, so it's really versatile. You'll need preferably a palette knife to mix your paints with. This one here is very, very cheap. It's less than $2. Plastic, very basic, but it works a treat. You will need paints, obviously. So if you're going to start with your very first paints, you will need, as a bare minimum, white. So titanium white is my favorite. Blue, ultramarine blue is my favorite. Burnt sienna or burnt umber, so that's your brown color. Need a red. This one is called Spectrum Red, so it's a little bit cheaper than some of the other reds you can get. And you'll need a yellow. This one is cadmium yellow. You will also need something to clean your brushes and to thin your paint, because remember, oil is not soluble in water, so you'll need something to break up the oils. So you can use a basic mineral turpentine, but that does tend to smell, so I like to use odorless solvent. This is by Art Spectrum. Now this stuff is quite expensive. This big one here cost me $109. So if you're worried about wasting it, here is a quick little tip for you guys. So I recommend, if you're starting out, to get just a crappy old jar. This is just an old jam jar, which has got my dirty solvent in it, and I've just got an old plastic cup. So what I usually do when I start painting is, this has been sitting for a couple of days settling, so the pigment has gone to the bottom. You can do this after as much as overnight. So for example, if I'm painting during the day, once I'm done, I'll just leave the dirty solvent here. I'll let it sit overnight with the jar closed to stop any odors and smells. And then the pigment will have settled to the bottom. So what I'll do, I'll just show you. Just going to open it. Now this is completely dirty, but if I tip this into there, it is clean. You probably can't see it's transparent. I'm getting it everywhere. And I just keep pouring until I can see the little bits of oil start to come, and then the solvent is clean, and I just poured it on my desk. That's fine. Okay, the solvent is clean and fine to use. You don't even have to really throw this out. You just put your dirty solvent back in this jar and let it sit again, and this will gradually just keep increasing until maybe you might want to put it in a plastic bag and throw it out with the trash. Okay, so I've just made a mess, so I've got a rag. I do recommend you having a rag, because oil paint can be messy. I also have an apron. This is just an old apron that an old friend gave me, so if you're messy, have an apron. Speaking of making a mess, I like to paint on an old towel. So I'm using just an old dining room table to paint on. That's my surface. Not everyone has a luxury of a studio. So I like to paint on, this is my painting towel. This is just an old towel that I've used, and it's covered in bits of old paint, but it's an old crappy towel. It's very absorbent, so it's perfect for that. I just put that on top of my old table and it's fine to work on. So I do recommend you have a towel to work on. You can try maybe an old bed quilt cover that you don't want anymore folded in half, should be fine, or you can use newspaper. So as long as there's something to cover the surface with, because oil paint does tend to go everywhere. Right. The next thing you will need is a medium to mix your oil paint with. So a medium is basically just, it's kind of like adding water to your acrylic, except it's kind of changing the consistency instead of just diluting it. So my absolute favorite go-to medium is this one. It's called Liquid Original. It's not the cheapest, but this is liquid gold. This is so amazing. This stuff, basically, you can scoop it out with a palette knife. It's got like this very viscous texture, kind of like a gel. Scoop it out with your palette knife, put it on your palette, just maybe a 20-cent coin's worth, and I'll almost never use that whole amount. I usually scoop it back into my tube and I'll just keep using it. This will last me a year. And it basically increases the drying time, so usually within 24 hours, and it makes the paint really easy to work with. So if you're going to use any medium, I would recommend going with this one. You can also use a linseed oil, but that increases the drying time. So if you're worried about your painting taking days and days to dry and to work on, I would say start with a Liquid Original. It's very good to work with. Cool. You will also need a surface to mix your colors on. So I have here a palette pad. It's got these really cool bits of greased paper that you can just rip off when it gets too dirty, and you can just even reuse it. And it's also a gray neutral colored surface, so that's really good to work on. You don't have to have one of these. You could also use an old wooden surface. Wood is really good for mixing oil paint. You could use, even if you're desperate, an old plate. I started mixing my paint on a plate back in the day. I would just recommend cleaning the plate off at the end so it doesn't get lumpy. You can also try a piece of glass, as long as it's not sharp on the edges. So if you have something like a mirror, that's actually a really excellent way of mixing oil paint. Just the same thing, try to keep it clean afterwards. So there you go. That is the absolute bare bones essentials of oil painting. Obviously from here, you can invest in as many brushes as you want. You can get all the crazy colors. You can get all the magical mediums that will make your paint glossy, less glossy, transparent, thick, slow drying, any of those things. You can get any number of cool looking aprons, but to start with, this is perfectly fine and you will have a wonderful time. So I encourage you to get started, have a look at these basic supplies, give it a go and have fun.